Hello and welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernoff. It is June. That means the Vancouver International Jazz Festival is on our minds. This is the first year that I'm really going into Jazz Fest coverage. I want to thank the Coastal Jazz and Blues Society for inviting me to go to all kinds of things this year. I'm so excited for it. But apparently they listened to the 2-hour podcast that I did with Chris Wong and they were like, you know what? We want you to talk for another hour. So Chris Wong and I are kicking off the Jazz Fest on Friday, June 21st at Ocean Artworks, 4 p.m. for free. We are doing a book talk for Chris's book, Journeys to the Bandstand, 30 Jazz Lives in Vancouver, that if you listened to his episode of this podcast, you already know all about. Please join us for free at Ocean Artworks on Granville Island on Friday, June 21st to kick off the 2024 Vancouver Jazz Fest. All right, we're getting closer to Jazz Fest. As I just mentioned, this guest, he is playing at the Jazz Fest, and we'll talk about that. But I had the chance to talk to him now, and it's somebody I've looked up to for a long time. You know, on an episode with Chris Fraser, I said once that you always want to find people who are 2 steps ahead of you. And here's another person who's been 2 or more steps ahead of me for a decade now, a bass player. Sorry for all the people who say I booked too many bass players. That isn't changing anytime soon because this was a fun one. That's up next. Our guest today is a bass player. He was born in Calgary. He is now in Calgary, but he will always be a Vancouver jazz musician to so many of us. You can hear him most lately on a couple of albums, including Kevin Romain's Salience Network, Lift by Last Ark Out, a band of which he's one of 5 members. He's coming to the Vancouver Jazz Festival, and you can hear him play 2 shows. One on Saturday, June 22nd. That's the opening weekend of the Jazz Festival with the Itamar Erez Quartet. That's at the Georgia Street stage downtown for free. And then on Tuesday, June 25th at Tyrant Studios, that's a ticketed show with a jam afterwards. And he is playing with Kevin Romain's Salience Network. We'll talk about all that. But please welcome, while he's in town, to the Rhythm Changes podcast, Jeff Gammon.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing? You've been traveling. You feeling all right?
Good, yeah. A little stiff from driving, but it's good. Yeah, it's been nice to see the coast again.
Yeah. Are you back? Is this a quick trip or a longer trip or what's going on? When did you come in? How much time you have here on this weekend? Long weekend.
Very quick. It's like, so I drove in, today's Saturday. I drove in on Friday, did a gig last night, and then I've got 2 gigs today and then a recording session tomorrow, and then drive back home on Monday.
Wow, that's intense.
Yes, yeah, it is. I know. I've flown the past couple times. I've come back, but we're recording some new stuff with Itamar, Kevin and I, and I wanted to have my own bass to play for that. So I was like, well, I'll drive out.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Can you say what your gig was last night? You told me before we started rolling. Yes. I think it's very fun.
Yeah, it's this band called the Smooth Sailors. So it's run by Amay Ayot. So she sings, runs the whole thing, picks the tunes, and then Jen Lewin is on keys. Rob Hamilton's been playing guitar the past couple times, and Kyle Radomski's on drums, and it's all yacht rock music. So it's very fun. It's ridiculous fun. It's so good.
So did you play any Steely Dan?
Yes, we played 2 Steely Dan songs, both off of Asia. We played Home at Last and Peg.
Nice. Yeah. Did you play any Michael McDonald, Doobie Brothers?
Yes, we did. We played Listen to the Music. That I keep forgetting. And Taking It to the Streets.
Nice.
I was almost going to say This Is It because he's on it. He's on so many of those tunes, but that's not him.
Yeah.
But
that's about as far as my short-term memory can get. What's another artist or another, like, in the standards book, if there was a real book of this music, or like what else did you play? Because that's all I can think of right now.
For yacht rock. Oh, well, Christopher Cross is pretty big.
Okay.
We did Sailing and Ride Like the Wind and stuff like that. I think Christopher Cross, Michael McDonald, and Steely Dan, I'd say, are kind of like the heavy hitters of that genre for sure.
Right on. Yeah, I saw that band because I always look at the gig list. I go back because I have these 2-year archive now, which is so much fun. And it gets spotty if you go back too far. But I could go back and see, like, that was one of the bands where your name comes up, like at Guilt & Co.
playing. Oh, really? That's cool. That's nice.
In the past years. But
yeah, it's fun.
So there's the two recent albums that I mentioned off the top, Salience Network and Last Ark Out. There's a few other connections. Like I had Robin Jacob on a while ago.
Yes.
We talked about Only Visitor, and I heard you at Ironworks, and Itamar Erez has the album out called May Song. And so there's this recorded segment of what you've been doing, and that's all Vancouver projects, even though now you're based in Calgary and you're still coming back here and you're playing those projects. When did you make this recent move back to Calgary? What's the timeline like on that in terms of like any Vancouver people who have been out of the loop with you? What's the update on that? What can you share about going back to Calgary recently?
Yeah, so moved back in, it was kind of like August, September. We had some crossover between our places. So yeah, but fully moved to Calgary September 1st. Yeah, and it was kind of in the works for a little while. I know my wife had been thinking about it for a while, and took me a little while to come around to the idea, but being from there, having family and all that kind of stuff, and cost of living, it was kind of starting to make more and more sense. And then we got kind of an eviction notice, and we were like, well, I guess now's the time. And so we started seeing, housing prices going up in Calgary too. And we're like, oh God, if we got to do this now. So we jumped on it and managed to purchase a 2-bedroom apartment in central Calgary in this area called Bridgeland, which is very beautiful and walkable. And yeah, it's actually been really, really awesome so far.
Nice. So it has been less than a full year, because this was just at the end of this past summer.
Yes, totally.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting because, again, like looking over some of the bands that you've played with in Vancouver, I can see the drop off if I go month for month on my own little gig list archive. But you've still been coming back, I would say, once a month or once every other month. There'll be a weekend or something where you pop up and it looks like you're fitting in multiple shows, not even like gigs that wouldn't be on the Rhythm Changes gig list or recording sessions or anything like that, but you're popping up and playing at like La Fabrique or Frankie's or whatnot, like maybe once a month or once every other month or so.
Yeah.
Go right?
Yeah. It's crazy. That was kind of the thing that I was in some ways worried about was, well, getting work in Calgary, which thankfully I've been very fortunate with as well. But also just wanting to stay connected to people here and not lose that. Because, I was here for like 11 or 12 years, and, there's lots of people I love, and the scene that I love. Why I moved here in the first place was because of the jazz scene, because I was like buying records from Cellar Live and being like, whoa, these players are awesome and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I've been very fortunate that people have still been reaching out to me being like, hey, when are you back? Are you going to be back soon? Thinking of setting up a thing. And then, I don't know how long it'll stay at the frequency that it's at, but it's awesome. I really hope to try and come back, like often enough. And I mean, Calgary's not that far. Like, I mean, I drove, it was like an 11-hour drive. I split it up in 2 days, but it's like an hour or an hour and a half flight. So I'm kind of ruminating on all these ideas on how can I connect like the Calgary and Vancouver scene a little bit and get some people, maybe get like a little circuit going or places people can play in both directions and stuff like that. And yeah.
Love it. Okay. I'm interested. I'm looking out for that. For me, you were always here. Like when I really started coming up, you were here and you were already finding your feet in Vancouver and you were already playing. And so I actually don't know anything about the pre-Vancouver chapter for you. I don't know how the bass got into your hands. I don't know about the process leading up to you coming to Capilano University and you being here, because for me, you were always here. So I want to know about the pre-chapter, the growing up there before you come here. Just tell me a bit about that part of your upbringing or journey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to to go back. It all started when, but I kind of, I always loved music. I tried a bunch of different instruments. I tried guitar first and actually was played left-handed, which is very strange.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And I was pretty young, and the guy he was like, oh, you got to learn just trying to teach me like Baba Black Sheep and all this stuff. And I was like, I just want to learn Beatles music. And so I kind of I was like, oh, this is dumb. And I stopped. And then I took piano for a couple years, and that was fine. I enjoyed it, but not enough to stick with it. And then I remember my uncle, who was a bass player, he was like, well, why don't you listen to your favorite songs, figure out what you love about them, and then decide like what instrument to try next? And I realized all the songs that I gravitated towards had strong bass lines. It was like, like Another One Bites the Dust or Come As You Are by Nirvana and all that kind of stuff. So I was then I picked up bass and took lessons from him. Was fortunate enough that this bass player, John Hyde in Calgary, had come to do clinics at my high school and was like, you should try out for the Mount Royal Jazz diploma at that point. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And I auditioned, I got in, and he was the one actually who I never really thought I would play upright bass. I had no interest in playing upright bass. I was a total Jacko head. I loved like Return to Forever and Al Di Meola and like all those like super hardcore fusion stuff. But then I remember John Hyde, he was like, well, I have an extra bass at home. Why don't I lend it to you for this semester? You can see what you think, and if you like it, you can buy it off me at the end. And so that's exactly what happened. Yeah,
that's how you got your first upright bass.
Yes, and it's still that's the same upright I play. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that is literally how you got the upright bass into your hands and the electric, and so then you were playing both. So then, did you go to Mount Royal Jazz and then you changed to Cap U, or what happened there?
Yeah, so it was a 2-year program. So I knew at some point I was going to have to leave. And the second year I was there, this wonderful saxophone player called Mark DeYoung came, and he's got a great band with one of my previous friends who was also in the program playing bass, Steve Shepard, and a drummer, Jeff Salima, who went to Cap as well, and they play in this band called Red Line Trio. They're great, play around Calgary all the time. They get Brad to come out and play with them too, and recorded with him.
Yeah.
So Mark, he knew that here's a bunch of students in second year having to figure out if they're going on where they're going to study. And he was like, he gave us an assignment that was like, okay, well, check out players in all the major schools around Canada, buy their records, listen to them, and decide who you want to study with.
Oh, that's heavy.
Yeah, totally. So I remember getting, like I said, buying records from Stellar Live, and I bought Jody's album and fell in love. I was like, oh my God, this music is awesome. The playing is great. This is exactly like what I'm going for. And so that's what made me decide to go to Cap. I didn't audition to any other place. I was like, no, I want to go to Cap. And there was like Brad Turner records at the library at Mount Royal too. So I remember getting a bunch of those and listening to those all the time. And yeah. And so that's how I decided to come here.
Yeah. I showed up at Cap in the fall of 2012. That sounds like it might have either been the same year that you did after Mount Royal, or maybe just a year after or something like that. It sounds like I showed up there right around the same time that you did.
You totally. Yeah. Because I would have, I think so. I think I arrived either 2011 or 2012 for sure.
Yeah, that's cool timing, because then that's how I got to the point where I feel like you were always here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at that point too, because I'd transferred, I was like partway between, I was in second and third year when I got to Cap. So, I would have seemed like I had been there maybe for a year or two before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so there, 2011, 2012, that is the beginning of a decade plus of you being based here. You finish your education there, you play in all the many bands, and you go on tours, and you do everything. You're based out of Vancouver for the next 11, 12 years this whole time before this move last summer where you went to Calgary. But what do you remember now that we're thinking about that time, like a decade plus ago when you showed up at CAP? Had you been to Vancouver much already? Had you spent much time there? What was like your initial impressions of Vancouver when you started to go to CAP and you started to be based here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had been here. I'd been to Victoria when I was a teenager. I had been to a band festival here in high school. But especially with those band festivals, you don't really get to see much of the city. You're just kind of in one place, play, and then you head out. But I had a friend from high school who was going to SFU, and I remember coming out one time and crashing with her because Soundgarden was playing at Rogers Arena. So I bought tickets and came out and crashed at her place on campus. Saw the fireworks down in English Bay, and kind of did a pretty typical Vancouver summer experience. But yeah, prior that was like kind of the first time I'd really been here and spent any time here, and I just was like, it's beautiful. It's like Joe Poole used to talk about how summertime rolls around and you can see all the tourists walking around being like, wow, I would love to live here. And then that's how he used to say that's how all these people end up moving here, is just, having that moment, and that was probably kind of the moment for me too. But yeah, the rain never bothered me. I remember people being like, oh, it rains there a lot, right? When I was talking about moving, I was like, yes, I know it rains. That's fine. But yeah, so it was very cool. It was very nerve-wracking. I'd never lived away from home before. Found an apartment with my then partner just down the hill from CAP, kind of near the pub there.
Yeah, there's the superstore and the pub and that kind of scene.
Yeah. And then I remember, getting here and hearing all the amazing players too, right? Like I was just, I feel like that happened every time. Like I got into Mount Royal, I didn't really know how to read. I couldn't play upright bass. There's all these people that were like farther ahead of it than me, and I was kind of like, oh shit, and I had to work at it. And then it was the same coming here and being like, oh, okay, here we go again, with like Eli was there and like all, and Millie and all these people. But yeah, it was cool. It was nice being between the years. That was kind of an interesting experience because I got to kind of know like all the people in kind of the year 3 at CAP at that time were like, Chris maybe, and John Nicholson maybe a year ahead. He might have been in my year. John Nicholson, Sarah Kim,
Jesus Caballero.
Jesus, exactly. Peter Saravalli, like all those. Yeah. Emma, and that's actually where I met Emma the first time, would have been there. And then the year below me was like Megan Gillespie and oh my God, names. Yeah.
Okay, so I was 2 years below that.
Right.
That's when I came in. Yeah,
okay.
Which kind of checks out in terms of this timing of me starting there and then you coming there. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because, I mean, Eli and Millie are so influential, it feels like. All of us who are around their age and younger for extended period of time, it seems like we all looked up to them.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I lived with him for a period of time, like me and this guy, Jack Kolish, who played drums. We lived in Eli's parents' place on Commercial Drive right behind St. Augustine's for like a year. That was awesome. That was very cool. And I remember Eli's room was like above mine, and I'd be like, sitting there slacking off or something, and I'd hear him start practicing, and I'd be like, God damn it. Pick up my bass and like, or like even just listening to him being like, what is he working on? What is this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I just talked about that on this show. I've had too many bass players on. It's a thing that I've been hearing about. But with one of the bass players, I was talking about how I had the spot in the bass room next to him. And so I would look at like what he was transcribing if he left any papers or something.
Yes.
Out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you were also like one of the bass players who I looked up to the most because you were always there and you were very active. You were doing all kinds of different things. And right from when I started to pay attention, right from when I had the wherewithal to pay attention to it, I could see that of all the people who were out there doing stuff, like you were one of the people who were the most immediate to me. Like we were both there, we were both going to the same gigs and hanging out with the same people and stuff. And I could kind of watch what you were doing. So for me, it was also just you in addition to like, it sounds like for you, it was Eli and maybe a couple other people like that. But for me, you were one of those people.
Thank you. Yeah. That means a lot, man. I mean, I remember also seeing you starting to come up too. And I remember being at Pat's one time and Darren and I were like chatting and just talking about you were up playing and we're like, man, Will sounds great. Like it's got such a solid time and it was, yeah.
Oh, and Darren was like my first ever private lessons teacher. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
When you were there though, who'd you study with? Did you study with him?
Yes. Yeah. I started with Jody for a year and I think she was only there for that year, and then she got into Kwantlen probably, I think, or got offered and ended up kind of moving schools. So I got a year with Jody, and then I spent some time with Darren and Andre. So I got a little bit of all of them, which was awesome.
Okay, yeah. So you got to see all the people who were the most active bass teachers there. So then when you finish the program, it feels to me as an observer that there's just a lot of continuity there. Like once you graduated, your environment was maybe pretty continuous. Like you keep on playing a lot of gigs, you keep on teaching, maybe like I know you taught it along McQuaid for a while around that time. But what did it feel like as you got the piece of paper and as you kind of you formally exited the program, but you're still deeply involved in this community? What's that period of time like?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was very, it felt very transitional in a lot of ways. Like, I remember, kind of, I'm sure as most of us experience, maybe not everybody, but I was kind of getting near the end of the degree and I was feeling kind of sick of school a little bit, and especially because at the end mostly what I had to do was like electives and stuff, so I was like oh god, just get me out of here, but yeah, it was kind of a weird transition because I was doing that and I wouldn't say, not that I was sick of jazz, but you kind of do something for so long and I feel like I had a moment of needing a little bit of stepping back a bit. I ended up getting offered some cover band gigs. I'm not exactly sure where that started, but I feel like somehow my name had gotten to Scott Tucker, and he was playing with Famous Players 2 at the time, and he got me to play, or maybe was it Courtney, the piano player? Anyway, I was
Courtney
playing
Ennis, right?
Yes, yeah. I think maybe I did a musical with Courtney, and he was like, "Hey, this guy Scott who plays in Famous Players needs a sub sometimes. Would you be willing to do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. That sounds fun." So that's how I kind of got in the cover band thing. Was doing that a lot. It it paid pretty well. I was meeting a lot of new people and getting more offers to do cover band stuff and getting kind of back into the electric bass after a long period of time. And so I felt kind of conflicted at one point. I remember doing a gig with Jesse Cahill, and he was like, "So you're keeping busy, man? What are you doing these days?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I feel like torn apart a little bit. Like I'm trying to play jazz. I'm trying to play like cover band stuff. Like I feel like my brain is scattered all over the place. And he was like, but you're doing it. You're like making money playing music. I was like, yeah. He's like, well, then what are you complaining about?
and
I was
he's
like,
right. So
I know,
right.
I know. I was like, oh man, it was kind of this moment where I was like, oh, that's so true. Like, you know, he was kind of like, man, when I finished school, I had to go do cruise ships and stuff like that. So
and many
yes,
still do
exactly.
from Capilano. That's another path.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So that was kind of my experience graduating, was like a little bit of, oh my God, what do I do now? Kind of, but yeah, luckily I think it's kind of like what our instructors say is like, just say yes to things and just do as much as you can. And it was a lot of that for many years. I was like you said, I was teaching at Long McQuaid. I was doing cover band gigs. I was doing jazz gigs. I was teaching at the Sarah McLachlan School. Like there was a period of time where it was just like I was balancing so many things. It was pretty hectic for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you're in that, either one, it can feel great if you have the awareness, or if somebody like Jesse points it out to you that, hey, you're actually doing it.
Yes.
But then it's also stressful.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it just feels like being pulled in so many directions. I mean, I'm sure you and everybody listening to this, doing any sort of gig work of any kind of has the idea where it's like, you're just like, man, it would kind of maybe be nice to do just like one thing for a little while. You know?
Of course.
Yeah. But
yeah. And I remember you used to get me to sub at that Long and McQuaid for you a couple times. I'm pretty sure the reason why most of the time was that you were touring with this group called the Sojourners.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, well, to talk about Jesse again, like he was really great. Like I had filled in at the VSO school for a summer camp with Jody. That's how I met Jesse. And I was so fortunate that he kind of started throwing stuff at me. Like there was this band, The Four Corners, that was like me. It was very short-lived, but it was like me, Jesse, Steve Caldestad, and piano player Tony Foster, playing the music of Cedar Walton.
Oh yeah, I think I heard you play at Pat's.
Yes, yeah. So we did that for a little while, and then Jesse obviously is in this band Cousin Harley, and so he was like, got me doing not Cousin Harley gigs, but like blues gigs with him and Paul Pigat. And then at that time, Paul had just been musical director for the Sojourners and produced one of their albums. So they were going on tour, and their bass player is also a very busy session musician. And so he couldn't always do the tours. So then they got me on some of the touring stuff, which was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I kind of remember when that was. That was like maybe 2014, 15, 16, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
This was around that time that you were fishing up at Capilano.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah. It was great. It was, once again, it was another thing where it's like, okay, now I got to learn how to play gospel and blues somewhat convincingly, and try my best at that. And it was amazing. Those guys are incredible. And Paul too, like he wrote some really great arrangements and stuff for that album. And we toured like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and that was my first touring experience.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. So my touring experience is only through like a 4-piece band that I started with 3 other guys. And that's pretty much the only one that I know. There's a wide range where there's experiences when you're touring with your own band that are a lot less comfortable and cushy than the one that I experienced. Not that mine was that much, but maybe I was in the middle. And then there's some where it's, you're on your itinerary and you really kind of got it all sorted out. But like, what was yours like? Did you like it? Like when you got that first touring experience, what did it feel like? What was it like?
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I was pretty spoiled because it was like, it was like one of those itinerary things. It's like flights are covered. You're playing music festivals. We've got either hotels or billets set up for you. You get paid, you get per diem. Like, it was like all that kind of stuff. So it was super fun, and we just got to hang out with those guys for like a couple weeks, which was really great too. And check out some music on the drives and like all that kind of stuff. And so that was my first touring experience, and it was pretty spoiled. I've definitely done the other thing with only a visitor. We've done some somewhat cushy and some less cushy, but we used to call it tourcation, because the first one we did was like, we're all good friends, and so it was kind of like a mini vacation, like going on tour, getting to play and camping and like crashing on floors and stuff. And that's fun in its own sense too. But
yeah. So what happened with the start of Only a Visitor? Because it sounds like maybe that band would have started around this time as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think actually totally. You're totally right. I can remember where I was living, and it was all happening while I was in that place on like Fraser and St. Catherine's or something, I think. Yeah, it was so Only a Visitor at that time was called Fistful of Snacks, which was like a solo project of Robin's.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And Kevin had played drums on one track. They go way back, so she was kind of like, oh, I always know I wanted Kevin on the thing. And at that time there was 3 vocalists in the band. It was, at least when I entered, it was Emma Postal, Selena Kurtz, and Sarah Kim.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sarah got me, I guess Robin was like, oh, I'm looking for a bass player. We always kind of laugh because it's like, I think she knew Winston Minkler, and like Winston and I think her Robin's partner George lived together for a period of time.
Okay.
So we always kind of laugh. We're like, I don't know why it didn't end up being Winston in this band. It was just like, I think, especially because Emma was also like, they were playing with Winston a bunch at the time. And I guess Sarah was like, oh, well, Jeff could maybe do the gig. And so I was brought on, and then eventually Sarah left, and this woman, Lindy, came in. And then I think she left, and that was when Robin was like, okay, maybe three vocalists is too much. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a first recording around that time too. Because obviously you have new album last year on Mint Records, right? But that's not the band's first. That's like the third or so recording.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So we did an EP up in Cumberland, I think. And and that was fun. It was like 2 different sessions. So I think Kevin and Robin and I went up, recorded the beds, and then Robin, Selena, and Emma went up and did the vocals afterwards. But Kevin was very sick. That it was kind of funny. I remember like we were recording and Kevin's like, oh man, I'm so tired, or I've just got a headache, and he was like pounding back Advil or something, and then it was like later after the session we realized that he would be able to, I can't remember what it was, but it was like he had pneumonia or something crazy like that, and recorded the album. and it sounded great. But that was the first one we released around that time.
Is that the beginning of your Kevin Romain collaboration journey? Because like, Salience Network, that's Kevin on drums. Mm-hmm. You're playing with him still at the Jazz Fest. And he's in Itamar Erez Quartet as well. Is that where you first started to play with him a lot?
Yeah, that was, I had never met him before. Like really, it was funny because I only knew Selena, Emma, and at the time Sarah when she was in the band. Yeah, I didn't know Kevin or Robin before. That was my first time working with them. And it's just so funny how things work, because I remember sometimes being like, like I said, feeling scattered, unsure of what I wanted to do, and kind of being a little flaky about rehearsals sometimes. And Robin was like, hey, do you really want to do this? Like at one point, which was awesome, because I was like, oh crap. Okay. Yeah. I need to get my crap together, and so I don't know. Yeah. I've always loved that about Robin. She's very like, she can be no bullshit, which is, nice. I appreciate so much. And so I don't know if I would have, stayed if if she hadn't kind of been that upfront with me and kind of called me on it. So, yeah.
And that tour that you mentioned, you went on with them, you went down the west coast of the US, right?
Yes. Yeah, we did. Yeah. Yeah, all the way to LA and back, and self-booked. Robin booked it and I think with help from Kevin too. And maybe from the others, but I know Kevin had, toured with Spring and some other bands down the coast there, so he had some connections, and so between him and Robin, they booked a bunch of shows, and yeah, it was great. I don't think we made a lot of money, but we really like cut our teeth on that. It's funny, sometimes playing songs from that time will just be like, we don't really have to run it, because it's like we played the songs from that album, which I think would be Lines. I think that was the Lines tour. Yeah, we just played those songs so much that they're like kind of in there somewhere,
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's one of the bands where somebody can hear you stretch out the most. Like, I think you're known, if somebody pictures what kind of music you play, as like just a stalwart, like straight ahead, laying it down bass player, whether it's in jazz or whether it's outside of jazz. But then on this group, you get to do a lot more fun stuff, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's very fun. I mean, I was so lucky, because that was really like, other than Last Ark Out, that was kind of the time I really got to be like writing bass lines and stuff, and try and work out some of that stuff. Because like you said, I like to, that is what I try to do in most like most things, is be the bass player, kind of like the core that everyone can do whatever they want to do around. And because the way Robin writes, she's just like, well, here's the keyboard part, here's the voice, and then you guys do whatever. Yeah. And so Kevin and I would be working things out all the time, trying to figure out, how to complement those things. And it was initially just upright. And then, like I said, I was being like, oh, well, I want to get back into electric bass. And so I was, started to try and bring that to the group, and trying to use like pedals, and trying to draw on like other influences like Radiohead, and
So Last Ark Out, probably also around that time, this is an interesting time where you got to start a lot of these new things. Last Ark Out has now culminated in this album that came out a couple months ago, Lift. The band has had the same members for the whole time, pretty much, or the long time, even though now you're based in different places, like including your move. But we've got Justin Gorey, who you may or may not know, who edits all of these episodes. He's going to that. That's a disclosure. Not that he's not paying me any money. I'm paying him money, so it's not. I don't know if I need to disclose.
Exactly.
But he's in the band, and so is Arthur Smith and James Humo and Colin Parker and yourself. 5-piece band. You just dropped a short but epic album.
Yeah, thank you.
Lift. It features a whole bunch of guests. Seems like a pretty collaborative band, because there's 3 composers on the record. Arthur has, I think, the most credits, but then Justin also has some, and you also have some. And I cannot remember off the top of my head which tunes you wrote from. I think there's like 7 tracks on the album. So that album is out there, and people can hear it right now. There's stuff to talk about in terms of where that band is out today, but we're talking about this formative time. So like, when did the band start? What was the beginning of Last Ark Out?
Yeah, so a lot of those guys went to VCC. That's where they all met. Colin ended up coming to Cap, and so did James for a little bit. And so I had met James Humo in combo class at Cap, and it was getting near the end of our time there, and he had a recital that he had to, like we all did. And so he asked me to play bass, and I said, yeah, for sure, I'd love to. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to be bringing in these guys from VCC that I know from my time there. They're going to be the rest of the band. And that was how I met all those guys. And they had been working together for a while, like they had done, recitals and things at VCC. And at that point, I think had already written a bunch of tunes. Like Arthur had a bunch of tunes that he had written, and in his time there, Justin had a couple too, and James, obviously. And I had things that I had written but didn't have the confidence to bring forward to anybody yet. So I think we played his recital. It was a good time. And then they were like, well, why don't we just keep Jeff on board and bring him, and keep this thing going. And so I can't really remember the specifics of it, but that we released an EP that was very, very from like grassroots, where it was like Arthur was working at the Sarah McLachlan School at the time, had access to rooms there, had some recording equipment. We literally just like wrote some tunes, set up a recording setup in one of the rooms, and just like in a day kind of recorded a couple takes of a few things. And that was kind of how it all started.
Yeah, started en route to that EP. And then there's all that time between then and now where you would have all gone and done different projects. But then at some point, it seems like somebody was like, okay, it's time to bring it back, or it's time for this. So what happened there?
So that person is almost always Arthur.
Yeah.
So yeah, God bless him for doing that. He was like, I think we got a small grant for Wake, and we recorded. Him and Justin had just finished working with Dan Klenner, who's a great drummer, a great audio engineer and producer, and he does a lot of stuff with the Star Captains. He was like their drummer and producer and all that stuff for a long time. And so Arthur and Justin had worked with him on the record, this Tiny Havoc record, which is another great band, more in sort of the funky neo soul kind of vein. And he was like, well, let's write some tunes, get them together and record an album with Dan. And so we did, and released that. And that record, I feel like, is more where we kind of found our footing in kind of the sound we were going for. And once again, that was like a couple tunes of Arthur's, a couple of mine, a couple of Justin's. I think James and I co-wrote one on that album. And then we're still working with Dan. He mixed and produced some of the latest record as well.
Yeah, because you recorded it with Dave Sikula, who we haven't talked about yet, but we'll talk about more.
Yeah.
At Monarch, and then Dan did the post production in his own studio.
Yes,
for exactly. Lift, for this album. Yeah. So, which tunes did you write on the album?
On Lift?
Yeah.
I wrote Brackish.
The first track.
Yes. Yeah. And the first track and the last track. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, you wrote the last track?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I have a like an album review that's done, and that's in the queue, and it's going to be published soon. And I thought the last track was fascinating because it's a genre switch from the rest of the thing. It was interesting.
Totally.
So that one is one of your credits. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. I think, what did I call it? It's That Dream Again or something. I think. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, so I always find it funny because I'm always like, kind of feel bad. Like it went from me like not having confidence bringing tunes to then like dumping tunes on these guys, just being like, hey, is this cool? Does this work? And like all this kind of stuff. And sometimes, I don't know. I grew up with a lot of rock music, so a lot of my tunes tend to be more rock vibe or like kind of folky kind of stuff. So it doesn't always fit, but yeah, I'm glad that track made it on the album. It was kind of a last minute addition. So
yeah, it's an interesting kind of closing comment or change up. Yeah, I know, because you already mentioned, you mentioned Nirvana and Soundgarden and all these things. You got this kind of alt rock 90s influences running through you, right?
Totally. Yeah, love all that stuff for sure.
Yeah. So that's an interesting project. Now you've got this great album that just dropped. Now you kind of got to figure out, and it's not all up to you to answer, of course. You've had to do some things as the albums come out. I know you have a publicist. You have like kind of the council grant. You made a bunch of videos. There's all this stuff with them. But because you're in different places, it's like it's not obvious what the next move is for the band, right? Because it's like in its niche, that album alone, for me, it sets that band as like that's one of the bands across the whole country that is the most outstanding that's trying to make music like that. So there's a place for you. Like there's a niche there that's ready for you that Last Ark Out stepped into in such a huge way. But it's like, what do you do next? Because the people are in different places, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. But yeah, it's always a discussion. Like we're trying to figure out the next thing because Colin's on cruise ships. I'm in Calgary. Arthur's in Montreal. And Justin's
he's in Europe but I mean,
right now.
He's here,
yeah. And James is now like running a music school and stuff like that. So, we went to Banff once. That's how we kind of prepped for this album. We wrote a bunch of tunes at the Banff Center in one of the residencies and practiced and worked on them there. And then, so we applied again. We didn't get in this time, so. Now the question is, okay, what do we do next? And I think we're going to try, all of us are here in August. So I think we're going to try and just meet up here in August, do another writing session. And I think that's kind of just how we're going to do it moving forward is maybe try and book some tours if we can. And then other than that, just like find little moments of time that we can all be together and work on some music. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so what about Kevin Romain's Salience Network? Now we're getting into more recent years and stuff. When does this project kick in? I want to hear about like the making of it a little bit because it was a big deal at Rhythm Changes. Every once in a while, I can get Chris Fraser to close out the year and write like a 2,000 word article about the album or something.
Yeah, that was a great article too. I was like, whoa, I've never read anything that Chris has written. This is awesome. Like, you know,
anytime he joins with one of those, I love it. So that was like the release concert at the All City Athletics, that space. But like the making of the album, when Kevin decided to do that project, you're in it, John Nicholson on saxophone, Faven Kadane also in there on trumpet. So tell me about Salience Network.
Yeah, so Kevin just had he'd been writing tunes for a while. I think some of this stuff was even maybe used in a previous band, but he always kind of loved the chordless kind of sound, and so do I for sure. And yeah, it seemed very organic, which I think is kind of how Kevin likes to keep things. So I don't even remember how it started, if we had a gig or if it was just like, it's like, hey, I have some tunes I want to try. And it was like, brought me and John Nicholson together on it. And then I remember I don't think we'd even been playing that long. And Kevin was like, I really want to record this band. And I was like, oh, okay. And so he fronted the money to record with John Ram at Afterlife. Thank you. Yeah, at Afterlife. And that was it was crazy. I remember going into it being like, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Like, feeling, I tend to like to feel over prepared or very prepared for things. So I was kind of like a little nervous, and he has a good instinct about that stuff. So he was just kind of like, yeah, we'll do it. We'll see what happens. And like, he's like, even if it's just to apply for grants, like that's something, right? And then it was very quick. I think it was like 1 or 2 days. And Kevin's like, I don't want to overcomplicate it. I want to just like play these tunes. We're going to take, it was 2 days. John Ram's going to set up the room, and I don't want like any headphones, isolation, like other than like baffles basically. And it's just going to be like us in a room together making music. And I was like, it was weird because going into it, I felt like kind of stressed, but then doing it and being there was probably one of the least stressful recording experiences I've ever had because of the vibe that Kevin brought, which was like, no, we're just going to be in the moment. We're going to do it and see what happens. And that's what this is. And his music lends to that too, because it's very, most of it is like maybe some chords, but really it's mostly just like a melody and a bass line. So it leaves it very open to interpretation, which is really, really cool.
So what is on the page of sheet music for you? Is it a bass line and chord symbols? Is it a little bit of bass and then a little bit of chords? Like what's on the page for you? Is it the melody and the chord changes?
Usually it's the two parts. It's like the sax part and the bass part. And that's it. And sometimes the bass part is like power chords or like double stops. Sometimes it's slashes, but a lot of the times it's like a bass note.
But does it say like D major 7 or whatever?
Sometimes.
Some of it,
okay, not all of it. Yeah. So, which is very fun.
I'm sure Kevin will love to hear that, the way you described the vibe that he created. Yeah, I could picture that, and it sounds great. It's one of the de facto albums of the year, I guess, at Rhythm Changes with that treatment. And there was a Jazz Fest show. I don't know if were you playing when last year's Jazz Fest, there was like the day before the festival's opening weekend or something. You played outdoors in Gastown or something. Did you do that?
Yes. Yeah. And Chris was on the gig too.
I think. He mentioned that. Yeah. Yes, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did great. It's, it was awesome.
Yeah. And then now this year's Jazz Fest, now you're playing at Tyrant Studios.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you're going to host a jam, I guess, afterwards.
Oh yeah. Is that what happened? I didn't know that.
So here's what's going down at Tyrant Studios. So they are doing a Jazz Fest affiliated lineup all through like the main week of the festival, because you're doing a midweek thing, and you're going to play, I believe you're going to play one set of music, and then there's going to be a jam set afterwards.
Great. Yeah. Cool. That'll be fun. That's awesome. And I'm pretty sure Faven's on that too, right? Yeah. Cause Faven for the recording session was brought in on like, I think 2 tunes, and just obviously just killed it. Cause Faven has that mentality and vibe that Kevin,
seeing what happens.
Yes,
yes,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah. So Faven's been a huge addition to that as well, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love the sound of the record. I love that it came out with Tim's Infidels label attached to it too. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So then what about Itamar Erez? Now we're rewinding a little bit, I guess, when you would have made his album. I know I heard this is his quartet, because Itamar also has a project out now called Migrant Voices.
Yes.
It's like an improvised duo. It's not that. This is his quartet where he's playing piano, and it's his. I think he plays guitar and piano as well. But it's his compositions. I heard you at Fort Langley, either last year or the year before.
Right.
I know Dan Howard plays with him sometimes too, though. But you're on bass. The Jazz Fest gig that you're playing with him on the opening weekend outdoors, you're playing with Sam Davidson and with Kevin and with Itamar. So tell me about that band.
Yeah. So that band, I remember when Mi Alegria came out, and Kevin handed me the CD and was like, "Oh, I just did this album," and I remember listening to it and being like, "Oh my God, this is awesome."
earlier Itamar Erez album."
Yeah. And James was on bass at that point. Another bass player who I'm just in awe of. But
James Meager was on it? Okay.
Yeah. So it was COVID, pandemic was happening, and James had moved to the Sunshine Coast, and I guess Itamar had a Frankie's gig coming up, like a live stream kind of thing, and obviously having worked with Kevin was like, Itamar was kind of like, well, James can't do it, he can't get away from the coast. Who would do it? Who do you think can do this? And Kevin was like, well, let's get Jeff on it. Let's get Jeff to do it. And so,
because you had been playing with Kevin in Only Visitor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so that's how I got started in that band. And then eventually I think Itamar, James kind of just like passed it off to me, being like, yeah, Jeff, you take it, you do which was very nice. And so that's how I started with Itamar, and oh man, it's been his music kicked
hard
my
music.
ass.
I listen to it and I think, oh, this is hard music to play.
Yes, yeah. So it was, and it's been awesome. Like I worked a little bit on odd time signatures, but I feel like that's where I've really like started to get a handle on them and kind of figured them out, is like playing his stuff, because I'd played like the odd 5/4 jazz tune or 7 tune, like all the things in 7 or something like that, and but this is like 5/8, and it's like this really specific like time feel. It's not just like the 3/2 clave kind of thing. And yeah.
Huh. Well, that will be on tap. On that opening weekend. So
Yeah,
you'll be able to bring that music out again. And that album, a lot of albums that got released in that time maybe didn't get a lot of sunlight. So it's great that you could still roll on that quartet, and it deserves the attention.
Yeah.
Maybe I just feel that way because like I was still getting going at Rhythm Changes yet. So my ears were not up and like alert to everything. But I also just do feel like in general from that deep COVID time, there are projects that came out that didn't get enough attention. So
yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, a lot of other things were taking our attention at that point for sure.
Yeah. Now running through a bunch of this time is also a working group that I put on the gig list several times and was probably going on before that. You've played a lot with Dave Sikula. You've had this trio with Dave Sikula, yourself, and Joe Poole. Played a ton.
Yes.
You also played in a quintet format. You played. I heard you last year at the Jazz Fest, and then you also had a Frankie's gig at some point along the way. Dave Sikula quintet with Brad and Steve Caldestad, and yourself and Joe Poole. So you've been playing all these gigs with Dave Sikula. So I want to hear about that too.
Yeah, that was another kind of thing where I think Dave was looking to put a trio together, and he knew he wanted Joe, and Joe was like, well. I forget how I'd been playing with Joe, but maybe just
I've heard you at the Tangent with all kinds of different people over the years.
Totally, like doing it. And Joe was like, well, let's get Jeff on it. And I'm trying to think I think it started pre-pandemic.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so we were kind of getting together. And I think a big part of it is just we were all down to rehearse and down to play, which is something I had been really looking for. Because, I'd had these original projects, but it was this thing where I was like, man, why can't, all the jazz groups are very can be very one-off. It's like, oh, you get a gig and then you hire these people, which is great. I love that as well. But there was kind of part of me that was like, oh, it would be great to have like a jazz band in the same way that like only a visitor is a band or something like that, And so I think we all kind of came together with that in mind, where it's like, let's rehearse, let's work on repertoire, let's get some stuff together. So we met at Dave's house a bunch, and sometimes at Demitone, where he also works. And he had some arrangements. Sometimes it was like, let's play this tune, and we'd like, Joe would be kind of embarrassed if I said this, but he's like the ghost arranger of the band a little bit. And then anytime Dave gives him credit on something, he's like, oh my God, like he gets very like aloof about it, which is very sweet. But really he comes up with a lot of like kind of ideas on the fly, where he's like, oh, does a rhythmic thing, or is like, well, let's vamp this, or like all these kind of things. And so does Dave as well, obviously. But yeah, it was very fun to do that and kind of come up with stock arrangements for our own things, and kind of a repertoire of standards that we loved to play in ways that we liked to play them. And then the pandemic happened, and Dave was staying at Joan's place when she was sick, and I lived close to there. And so we got together and would play, socially distanced with masks and with the doors open and stuff. And we'd get together and play. That was a time when we really did a lot of that. And we would record. Dave, recording person, would always record it. So we'd jam a couple things, record it, and then we'd sit and listen back to it and figure out what was working out.
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah. So that's how that band kind of got going. And then we did stuff at the Poorhouse regularly, and Water Street, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. And then he just decided, okay, I want a bigger project, or Jazz Fest called me maybe, and he puts together this quintet.
Yeah. I think he kind of always had this dream of having Steve and Brad playing horns together at the front of a band. And so, Jazz Fest called, and he's like, well, now's the time to expand this a little bit. So, and actually we've got a Tyrant date in September with that quintet as well.
All right.
So there will be more. Yeah.
Okay, Corey, if you're listening to this one, you gotta give them a Cellar album too.
Yeah. 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 That'd be fun. That'd be very fun.
So you're in Calgary now. This summer, you're going to hit a year. I just did an episode with John McCaslin. I rocked my 4 on the Floor blog t-shirt for this one today, sitting here with you. John said that he's starting a trio with you and with the guitar player.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy, Aaron Shore, who's from Winnipeg, recently moved. There's been that big influx of people to Calgary recently, which has been awesome. There's like Aaron is one of them. There's this piano player from Montreal, Chris Talkner, as well, who just moved there. So there's obviously like different people who have stayed there and grown a career, as well as people who have moved back, like David Lavoie as well is another tap trumpet player who moved out here and moved back, and he's keeping really busy and doing lots of stuff. But yeah, so it's cool. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of new blood in Calgary, and Aaron is one of those people, and he's a great guitar player. And John, has been getting us together to work on some originals. I think it's a lot of his originals. We've each brought 1 or 2, Aaron and I, to the project so far, and I think John, we've been talking about trying to find some time to record in the summer as well, hopefully. So, yeah.
Okay, I look forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody else that you're playing with in Calgary right now? Is there anything else that's happening in your current home base that you want to mention that I wouldn't have otherwise heard about?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of great new music. Like David's got his own quartet, which I think isn't
he like hosting a jam or something, or hosting a regular gig?
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is Calgary has regular gigs. Like there was this one place, Betty Lou's, that had like Red Line Trio that I mentioned previously. They'd play every Thursday. David played they play every Tuesday or no. Anyway, there was
every week.
Yeah, there was like
nice.
So actually, that's what it was. David played Tuesday nights every week. Red Line did Thursday nights every week, and there was another band that did Sunday nights every week. So that was a very cool thing where like a lot of people, have these like regular gigs, and they're kind of like, getting to work on material all the time there. There's this piano player, Mark Lemacher, there who does a bunch of stuff with Katie George, and he's got a trio with some people there that are working all the time, and it's super cool. And I mean, there's this guy Wakefield Brewster, he's the poet laureate of Calgary.
Okay.
And so John McCaslin and myself and that keyboard player Chris Talkner I'd mentioned are working on some music for him to like either rap or do spoken word over top of. Yeah, there's a lot happening, which is cool. It's nice to see.
That is good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I want to check it out at some point next time I get the chance to visit Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad I caught you on your visit here. I've had a lot of fun hearing about all these different projects over the years. A lot of them, I remember them very well. And some of them still have threads to today. And yet there's also all this new stuff happening today. So it's great to hear. I've always looked up to and admired your playing so much. Thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this podcast, man. It's like it's a wonderful beacon in the scene here. And I was so thankful and kind of blown away that you asked me to be here. So I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you enjoyed it, become a member for free today at rhythmchanges.ca. You'll get the free weekly email Tuesday mornings. I send out artist events, recordings, features, things from our community, plus the week's upcoming events from the gig list. Rhythm Changes is a Turnoff Music production. This episode was hosted and produced by me, edited and mixed by Justin Gorey. I'll catch you around the Vancouver Jazz Festival. A couple more episodes between now and then, but until next time, have a good one.